Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my channel, Fluent Pro Hub.
Okay, so we're diving into something a lot of you guys have been asking about, how to become fluent in English and specifically in like a really short amount of time.
Yeah, a rapid approach to English fluency.
Yeah, and one of our listeners was kind enough to share some material from Fluent Pro Hub, and they have this whole system for becoming fluent in just 21 days.
Wow, 21 days.
So we had to take a look at this.
That's a pretty ambitious goal, right?
Right, so 21 days to fluency. You know, we're always up for analyzing these kinds of accelerated learning programs. So I'm curious, when we dig into this, what is their like fundamental approach? What's the big idea?
Well, right off the bat, what struck me was their emphasis on like doing rather than just knowing. You know, they jump straight into practical strategies and kind of cultivate the right mindset right from the get-go. So it's not about just like cramming your head full of grammar rules.
Right.
It's about actually using the language actively from day one.
Right. So it's not just about theoretical knowledge. It's actually about getting out there and using it and making the mistakes along the way.
Exactly.
And I think the very first point they hammer home is this idea of the power of practice. And they have these really relatable examples of learning a new route, you know, driving directions or mastering a bicycle. And you wouldn't think those would necessarily tie into language learning, but how are those analogies so crucial to their method?
Well, if you think about how we actually learn any kind of skill,
Right.
both of those examples involve a certain degree of initial clumsiness.
Sure. Yeah.
And you're definitely going to make mistakes along the way.
Right. Yeah, you're going to hit some curbs.
Right. You wouldn't expect to navigate a new road perfectly the first time and certainly not ride a bike without maybe a couple of wobbly moments in the beginning.
Yeah, you'll fall a few times for sure.
And so what's really key here is this mental shift that they encourage.
Okay.
These stumbles, these mistakes. They're not failures.
No, that's interesting.
They're actually essential feedback.
Okay.
In fact, the Fluent Pro Hub material puts it really plainly. Mistakes are not failures. They are steps towards fluency.
I love that.
You know, so think about it. When you're riding a bike, you adjust your balance based on those wobbles.
Right.
And similarly, every time you make a grammatical error, or maybe use the wrong word in English,
Yeah.
a native speaker's reaction, or even just your own realization, that gives your brain the information it needs to kind of fine-tune your internal understanding of the language.
I see.
It's like those little course corrections.
That's a great way to think about it. Yeah, you're constantly making those micro adjustments
exactly
as you go.
Yeah.
So I guess what we're saying is it's not about being perfect right out of the gate. It's about getting on that linguistic bicycle and, you know, maybe being okay with a little bit of a wobble.
Exactly. And I think that's got to be really encouraging for our listener.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially if they've, you know, felt held back by this fear of not getting everything perfectly right.
Right. If you wait until you're perfect, you'll never speak.
Exactly.
You'll never get on the bike.
And what I find really powerful is how they reframe those errors. It's not like they're these roadblocks that, you know, stop you in your tracks.
Right.
They're more like those bumps in the road that teach you to steer better.
I love that.
It's almost like they're saying, you know, just as a child doesn't give up on walking after falling down.
Right. Yeah.
Shouldn't give up on speaking English because of a few mistakes.
Exactly. Yeah. It's part of the process.
Exactly.
You have to embrace those stumbles.
Absolutely.
So, okay, active practice, you know, with all those wobbles included, that's kind of the foundation, it seems like.
Yeah.
What's kind of the next crucial element that they build upon in this 21-day, you know, plan for rapid fluency?
Well, the next thing they talk about is this idea of creating an immersive environment.
Okay.
And they start by, you know, mentioning this ideal scenario of being surrounded by English speakers.
Right.
Maybe living in an English-speaking country. And,
Yeah.
you know, what makes that kind of total immersion so powerful for learning a language in their view?
Well, I think it's that constant exposure, right?
Yep.
Like you're hearing English everywhere you go, whether you're, you know, in shops or on the street or on TV. It almost forces your brain to start engaging with the language just to navigate your day-to-day life.
Exactly. It's like being thrown into the deep end of the pool.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you have to swim.
And what I found really insightful here was their comparison to how babies learn their first language. You know, they're not sitting there with textbooks and, you know, having grammar rules explained to them.
Right, it's all just absorption.
It's all absorption. It's just this constant stream of auditory input and repetition.
Right, and then eventually they start to make those connections and start speaking.
Exactly. And so Fluent Pro Hub suggests that even if you can't physically travel to an English-speaking country, you can still tap into this natural learning process by immersing yourself in English as much as possible in your own environment.
Right.
And what's interesting is, even if you don't understand every single word, just being exposed to language that you mostly understand, that's how your brain naturally picks up patterns of vocabulary.
I see.
So it's kind of like we can almost trick our brains into absorbing English.
Right. Yeah. I like that. I like that framing. So for our listener who, might be based somewhere where they don't have a lot of English interaction in their daily life.
Right.
What are some concrete ways that they can start to create that sense of immersion without, hopping on a plane?
Absolutely. So they suggest some really tangible things.
Okay.
Like changing the language settings on their phone.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And all their devices to English.
Okay.
Really consciously choosing to watch movies and TV shows in English.
Right.
Listening to music and podcasts in English. Just making English this constant presence in their daily sensory input.
So you're basically making English the dominant language in your immediate environment as much as possible.
Exactly.
Okay. I like that. That's really actionable.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're actively practicing. We're creating this English-rich environment.
Right.
What's the next step in this fast track to fluency?
Okay, so the next really important shift that Fluent Pro Hub emphasizes is this idea of thinking in English every day.
Oh, that's interesting.
And they point out that, if you're constantly translating in your head from your native language to English and back,
yeah,
it really slows down your speech and it makes it sound a little less natural.
Right, because you're trying to fit your native language into the English framework, and that doesn't always work so well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what they're really getting at is, can you cut out that middleman of translation?
Okay.
Can you start to train your brain to link concepts and ideas directly with English words and phrases?
Right. So you're not going through that extra step
Exactly.
of translating. You're going straight to the English thought.
Right. And what I found really helpful was they give some very practical exercises to help with this.
Okay. Like what?
Simple things like describing your morning routine to yourself in English.
Oh, okay.
As you're doing it.
While you're brushing your teeth.
Right. Or just kind of internally narrating your day in English as it unfolds.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that.
So, for example, instead of thinking to yourself in your native language, oh, the weather's really nice today.
Right.
And then translating that,
yeah,
you would immediately think, the weather's nice today.
Okay. Yeah. Just go right to it.
Go right to the English thought. And I think for a lot of people, that sounds like a big mental shift.
Yeah, it is. It is a different way of thinking.
Yeah.
Do they have any tips for making that leap from constantly translating to, thinking more directly in English?
They do. And it really comes down to this idea of consistent self-talk.
Okay.
That internal monologue that we all have going on in our heads.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about consciously switching that to English.
Okay.
And that might feel awkward or slow at first.
Sure.
But the more you practice thinking in English, the more automatic it becomes.
So it's like building that habit.
Exactly. It's building that habit. And they even compare it to things like learning to type or play a musical instrument.
Oh, interesting.
Initially, it requires so much focus and concentration. Mm-hmm. But with repetition, it starts to become second nature.
Right. And then you don't even think about it. You just do it.
You just do it. And I was even thinking about it like, imagine your brain has two separate rooms for languages.
Okay.
Translating is like going back and forth between those two rooms every time you want to say something.
Oh, I like that.
But thinking directly in English is like setting up shop in the English room.
Right. Just stay there.
So your thoughts are flowing directly in that language.
That's a great way to visualize it. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're, striving to think in English more and more.
Right.
But then there's the whole other issue of actually speaking it out loud and inevitably making mistakes.
Right.
Which I know is a huge hurdle for a lot of language learners.
Absolutely. It could be so intimidating.
It is. So what's the Fluent Pro Hub's advice on this whole idea of, active speaking despite imperfection?
Yeah.
How do they address that?
Well, they really go right at that fear of making errors.
Okay.
And they do it with these really relatable analogies. They ask, would you stop walking just because you stumbled once?
Right.
Would you give up on driving after making a wrong turn when you were first learning?
No, of course not.
Of course not. And so the implication is clear. Those mistakes,
They're part of it?
they're unavoidable.
Yeah.
And they're actually essential parts of the learning process.
Yeah, you can't learn without them.
You can't learn without them.
Yeah.
And so it's about becoming comfortable with the fact that you're not going to sound perfectly polished
Right.
from the start.
Yeah.
and embracing those imperfections
As a necessary step.
as a necessary step forward. And what I think is really encouraging is that they emphasize that even with mistakes, communication is still possible.
Right.
And it's still the primary goal.
It's the goal. Yeah.
And so they really advocate for, putting yourself out there and finding opportunities to speak.
Right.
Even if it's with a language exchange partner online.
Yeah.
Through one of the many apps or websites that are available.
Yeah. There are so many resources out there.
So many resources. And it's just about getting those words out.
Yeah.
Even if the grammar isn't perfect.
Right. Just getting over that fear.
Exactly.
Of making the mistake and just doing it.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So we're talking about active speaking, but then there's the other side of the coin, which is listening. How important do they emphasize that role of listening in achieving fluency?
They present listening as absolutely fundamental to developing natural sounding speech.
Oh.
And again, they make that comparison to how children acquire their native language.
Yeah.
They're listening intently for a long period of time before they start speaking fluently themselves.
Yeah, just soaking it all in.
Exactly. They're soaking it all in. And so the idea is that by consistently exposing yourself to, natural English conversations, your brain will start to absorb the natural rhythm.
The musicality of it.
Yeah, the intonation patterns and common idiomatic expressions.
Yeah, and I always say it's not just about the words themselves. It's about how they're delivered. Exactly. Like the music of the language.
It's like the music of the language.
Yeah.
And pay attention to where speakers raise their voice, where they pause. Those subtle cues are really key to natural sounding speech.
They are. They're so important. And a lot of people overlook that when they're learning.
Yeah. And they focus so much on grammar and vocabulary.
Right.
That they forget about that musicality.
Right. Yeah. So I guess what you're saying is I finally have a valid excuse for binge watching all my favorite shows. It's homework.
In a way, yes.
I love it.
That consistent auditory input is really powerful.
Okay.
It's helping your brain recognize recurring sound patterns. You know how words are typically grouped together? Even different regional accents.
Right.
And so they recommend a variety of resources, everything from movies and TV series to YouTube videos, podcasts. And they stress that even partial comprehension is beneficial.
Okay, so you don't have to understand every word.
You don't have to understand every word.
Just getting that exposure.
Yeah, it's about the exposure. Yeah. And over time, your understanding will deepen, and you'll naturally start to incorporate those patterns into your own spoken English.
I like that. So it's a more passive form of learning, but still really valuable.
Absolutely. It's still active in a way because your brain is doing a lot of work.
Yeah, that's true.
Even if you're not consciously aware of it.
So, okay, listening is crucial for absorbing that natural flow of spoken English.
Right.
But what about actively, expanding your vocabulary? What does the Fluent Pro Hub have to say about that?
Well, what's interesting here is that they emphasize reading materials that genuinely spark your interest.
Okay.
Rather than sticking to, traditional language textbooks.
Well, that's good advice.
Yeah, they suggest examples tailored to different hobbies and interests.
Okay.
So if you're into sports, you could read sports articles.
Oh, yeah.
If you're into technology, you could read technology blogs or even fiction novels.
Right, right.
And the core principle here is that you're far more likely to remember new words and phrases when you're engaged with the content.
Enjoy it.
Yeah, because you're seeing those words used in a meaningful context.
So it's not just memorizing lists of vocabulary, it's seeing them used in actual real-world situations.
Exactly. And, it makes the process of learning vocabulary so much more enjoyable.
It does, and it makes it stick more, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
Because you have that emotional connection to it.
Yeah.
So if our listener is really passionate about, let's say, cooking, reading English language recipes and food blogs would be just as valuable as, sitting down with a vocabulary flashcard deck.
Absolutely. And it's probably a lot more fun.
Way more fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we've talked about the active skills, speaking, writing, and the more receptive skills, listening, reading.
Right.
What specific role does the Fluent Pro Hub say that writing plays in this 21-day push for fluency?
They argue that writing can really help you organize your thoughts in English.
Okay.
Speaking can feel very spontaneous.
Right. It's in the moment.
It's in the moment.
You don't have a lot of time to think.
Exactly. But writing forces you to consciously think about grammar rules.
Yeah.
Sentence structure.
Yeah.
The words you're choosing.
Right. You have to slow down.
Yeah, you have to slow down. And that really helps to solidify your understanding
I see.
of the mechanics of the language.
That makes sense. And so it's almost like all of these skills are deeply interconnected, right?
Yeah, are.
Speaking, listening, reading, writing, they all kind of feed into each other.
Absolutely. They reinforce each other.
Yeah.
And they contribute to this more holistic understanding of English.
So what kind of specific writing exercises does the Fluent Pro Hub recommend?
Well, they suggest some really practical, low-pressure activities.
Okay.
Things like keeping a daily journal in English.
Oh.
Even if it's just a few sentences.
Right.
Maybe writing social media posts or comments online in English.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And the goal here is just to regularly engage with that written form of the language, which will then contribute to, clearer, more structured thinking when you speak.
I can see that, yeah. When you're writing, you have to be more deliberate.
Yeah.
With your thoughts, and that translates into better speaking.
Exactly. It's like a mental workout.
Right.
For your English.
Yeah. I like that. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different strategies, but what about those times when you don't have someone to practice with, directly? Does the Fluent Pro Hub have any suggestions for that?
They do, and this is where it gets a little unconventional.
Okay.
They actually suggest practicing conversations solo.
Oh, by yourself?
By yourself, talking to yourself in English.
So basically like having imaginary conversations in English.
Yeah. And I know that might sound a little strange.
Yes, it does.
At first, but it creates this pressure-free environment.
Right.
Where you can just practice forming sentences, expressing your thoughts out loud without any fear of judgment.
Because no one's listening.
No one's listening.
Okay. Yeah. So do they have any like specific ways that someone can effectively practice, having conversations with themselves in English?
They do. They recommend simple things like standing in front of the mirror and, giving yourself an introduction in English.
Oh, that's a good one, actually.
Yeah. Or maybe role-playing everyday scenarios that you might encounter.
Yeah.
Like ordering food at a restaurant or asking for directions.
Oh, that's good.
And another really valuable tip they have is recording yourself speaking.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And then listening back critically.
That's really good. Yeah.
To identify areas where you might want to improve your pronunciation or fluency.
Yeah, because when you're listening back, you can hear things that you don't pick up on when you're in the moment of speaking.
Exactly. It's like getting an outside perspective on your own speech.
I love that tip. That's really good. Okay, so we've talked about all these different, elements of the Fluent Pro Hub method. What is the essential ingredient that kind of ties it all together and makes this 21-day challenge potentially achievable?
It all comes down to consistency.
Okay.
That's really the key.
Makes sense.
Fluent Pro Hub really emphasizes that making significant progress in such a short amount of time. It's not about these occasional intense study sessions.
Right.
It's about establishing a daily habit of engaging with the English language in all these different ways.
So it's more like, spreading it out, having a little bit every day.
Exactly. They actually use the analogy of daily exercise.
Oh, okay. I like that.
For physical fitness.
Right.
It's that regular, consistent effort that yields the most noticeable and lasting results.
So it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. And they even suggest that dedicating even just 1 hour each day.
Oh, wow. Just 1 hour.
To focused English practice, incorporating all these different techniques, can lead to significant improvements over the course of 21 days.
That's really not that much time if you think about it.
It's not.
An hour a day.
It's manageable.
Yeah, that's pretty doable for most people.
It is.
So we've talked about all these practical strategies, the nuts and bolts of it, but what about the psychological aspect? Learning a new language can be a very emotional experience.
Absolutely.
So does the Fluent Pro Hub address that and specifically this idea of self-belief?
They do. And they have a whole section dedicated to the power of belief.
Okay.
And they stress that, your mindset plays a really significant role.
Makes sense.
In your language learning journey.
Because if you don't think you can do it, you probably won't.
Exactly. And they even include this really powerful quote in the material. If you tell yourself, I can never be fluent, then you will always struggle. But if you say, I will improve step by step, then nothing can stop you.
I love that. So it's really about that internal dialogue.
It's about that internal dialogue.
And shifting it to be more positive and encouraging.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's easy to get discouraged when you're learning a language.
Right. It can be frustrating.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that every fluent English speaker was once a beginner.
Right. They were all there at some point.
You all started somewhere.
Yeah.
And often the key differentiator is their willingness to keep going.
Right. To not give up.
To not give up. To embrace the challenges and to believe that they can do it.
To have that self-belief.
And so cultivating that positive growth-oriented mindset can make those inevitable hurdles feel less intimidating and more like stepping stones on the path to fluency.
That's a great way to think about it. Yeah. So to kind of sum up for our listener who's, eager to improve their English speaking skills and they want to do it quickly.
Right.
The Fluent Pro Hub method basically boils down to consistent daily practice across all those core skills.
Right.
Listening, reading, writing, while actively working on thinking in English directly.
Right.
Seeing mistakes as opportunities, not failures. Immersing yourself in English as much as possible.
Absolutely.
And crucially, having that belief in yourself that you can achieve fluency.
It's so important.
And I think they make a really compelling case that you can make significant progress in a relatively short period of time.
I agree.
If you use the right strategies and you stay dedicated.
Yeah, it's a really encouraging approach.
It is. So for you, our listener who shared this amazing material with us, we want to leave you with this final thought to consider. What's one small but meaningful change that you can make today to immerse yourself more in English? And what impact do you think that one change will have on your confidence by, let's say, this time next week?
I love that.
It's about taking action.
Yeah.
And it's about believing in your ability to learn and grow.
Absolutely.
So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
If you found this video helpful, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're here for the first time, don't forget to subscribe for more engaging content to improve your English. Keep practicing and take care.